Welcome to Leading Transformational Change. I'm Lori Heffelfinger. I'll be the moderator for this panel. The Leading Transformational Change Forum is brought to you by the Consortium for Change, powered by One Business World, and inspired by the book, The Secret Sauce for Leading Transformational Change. Today is day 3, the final day of the 3-day virtual conference. We're excited to have 8 sessions today that will focus on prioritizing culture and people when leading transformational change. Our keynote speaker today is Srikant Chellappa. He is going to be speaking on building a strong culture in a hybrid world. Sri is the CEO and president and co-founder of Engagedly, an AI-enabled talent management platform that redefines performance appraisals. And speaking with him, I can definitely say he's a passionate entrepreneur and a leader in building high-performance organizations that care about people. He brings 20 years of experience in leading software and consulting organizations and has extensive experience managing teams at EY and Capgemini. He understands the ROI of investing in people and has worked hybrid for a long time. A few other facts: he's an author of a book called The Black Book of Agile Project Delivery in Distributed Teams, and he's a writer, producer, and director of 6 feature films. Welcome, Sri. Looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Lori. It's a pleasure to be on this. Awesome. So, I wanted to quickly start off with saying that, hybrid workforce has actually been there for a long time. It just got coined really hard during the COVID time period where people went fully remote and then came back part of the time, and some organizations are doing it, in a hybrid fashion where we have in office few days a week, 2 to 3 days a week. Some organizations are saying 4 days a week. So any combination thereof is considered a hybrid workforce. Also, the other combination to think about is some people might be working in the office all the time or most of the time, but there's some people who are completely remote in the same group of people that are working together. That is also a definition of a hybrid workforce. So you could have certain people on the office space some of the time, and some people all the time, but some people never or occasionally. Any combination thereof is a hybrid workforce. And really, working in a hybrid workforce requires intentionality. So I'm going to really talk about how do you really work and build an organization to have effectiveness in your organization when you have a hybrid workforce. So, if you look at the statistics out there, there's 66% of the employees in the US work remotely at least part of the time, right? And 22% are, and they're more happier than on-site workers, 22% more in this case. And one of the studies that came out, I was looking at it, and this is one of the third most reason to actually look for a job. So it is important that we embrace this new way of work. Otherwise, you're going to lose your good people. So if you look at the advantages of what are really the value of doing that, right? One advantage is if you're in a high cost city, or if you're in a city with not many skilled resources, let's say you're in West Coast and your cost of living is really high, obviously, or you're in somewhere in a small town, Ohio, or Missouri, where I am, you may want to have access to a bigger pool that's not accessible in your neighborhood. That gives you access to the expanded labor pool. You can now hire and work with teams across the entire US and maybe even internationally, right? The other thing is, as we said, there are a lot of reasons where people want to work remote because of different flexibility they need, or some of them really like to work alone. In that cases, you can attract really high caliber talent from top brands otherwise you wouldn't have. And then retaining, right? And I said one of the statistics where people do leave often because they don't want to work full time in an office because for one, they've gotten used to it. So obviously there's that habit, but also the fact that, some of them do have other nuances they need to work with. So they need to work with, with their family situation or whatever that is that leads them to be more remote, and that in those cases you can retain high caliber talent. And there are people who work better alone. There are people who need that alone time, whether they're maybe designers or they are developers, or they are highly skilled workers where they don't necessarily need to interact all the time, and they get maybe disturbed at office, they get distracted by all the different commotion. There's productivity improvements, and when they do want to collaborate, they work together in that collaboration environment once in a while, and that's when they can go hybrid, where they come into the office on a Friday or one day a week or maybe once a quarter. So there are a lot of advantages, and you have to look at your organization to see what of these advantages can you really leverage in your organization. So there are challenges, though. It's not like all puffy clouds and shiny skies. You have issues with access to resources. So if somebody is remote, you can't just go and tap on their shoulder and ask a question. You obviously have to be more intentional about knowing that. Sometimes there are people who get disconnected with the culture. So that requires intentionality on how do you actually build a culture that is not just built for an office environment. And then there are people who don't feel fully comfortable sharing their full self. Many of them will not come on the camera during meetings, for example. Some of them don't want to share anything more than just work because you're not having that level of comfort over a computer, right? And that creates some challenges on creating that level of connection that you need in teams. Team collaboration definitely does suffer for certain types of work. If you are doing a design work together, the design work requires people to collaborate together, right? And if people are collaborating together, that requires you to be in person in some cases. If there's a group of engineers trying to debug a solution, maybe it is better to work together in person. So there are certain roles that requires team collaboration, but many roles can be done without that in-person environment. And there's reduced cross-functional communication and collaboration because you lose that serendipitous communication and meeting that you might have at the water cooler, right? You overhear some discussion and you can jump in and actually add in some of your own perspective that can enhance the overall outcome of that discussion. So some of those cross-functional collaboration communication gets missed because you can't really plan for that. Those things just happen in an environment where different teams are working together. But the hybrid work management is broken, like I said before, and I use the word intentionality a lot. Historically speaking, the management practices were all built with a inherent assumption that all the work is done in the same place. It's done in a co-located environment. But that's not true anymore with hybrid work. But our management practices, our practices of a manager, of leaders, our organizational constructs are really not built truly in the past for succeeding in a hybrid work environment. So it does require intentionality. So to make sure that you're not ignoring the people who are not at work. Let's say in your team, three of you are in the same city, you come to the office every day, but two of you work in two different cities outside of the home city. In those cases, how do you make sure you're not isolating those two people? How are you making sure that you're involving them in your culture, in your collaboration, where they feel they belong there, right? For example, you could be going out getting coffee together, you could be going out getting lunch together, and you're having all these discussions, you're building really tight-knit connection, but you're leaving those two people out in the team. So that requires you to really think about how do you really make an intentional effort to make sure they're not being left out and ultimately get disconnected from your organizational culture. Okay, so really to make hybrid work, organizations, the management, the leadership really need to rethink about how work is organized, managed, and then how to collaborate intentionally that is built for a hybrid environment. So that's really the crux of the success that you need in hybrid environment. So recommendations. So what do you need to do to make sure your hybrid environment that you have works effectively? So you're not leaving out those people who are not at work. You're making sure your culture is still thriving and everybody is connected and aligned. So there are some light questions you can ask, right? So this is some other questions that you can ask. Figure out what work can be done independently and define what work requires collaboration. There are certain type of work, as I mentioned earlier, that can be done independently, and then certain types of work that can be done requires collaboration. And then plan your work and your location accordingly. What are some of the things that we do when we are together that we don't do when we are not? Right? For example, what are the things that we are doing when we are together, but we are not doing it when we are not? So an example of that is really being yourself and being in a situation where you are having that discussion, those serendipitous discussions, those ideas that you can't plan for that just come out. How do you have those type of outcomes and events when you are not together? So those are some of the things to really think about. So then plan accordingly for that. And describe when our teams work best with other teams. So if you are, let's say, an engineering team, and then there's another team that's a marketing team, or there's another team that's let's say, that's tech support or some other function within the organization. Figure out what our teams do best with other teams, and then your work construct, whether it's in person or remote or hybrid, needs to be constructed around that type of work. So some other works that you do with other teams can be done very well remotely, but some other work that you do with other teams needs to be done together, right? And so you really need to have that intentionality and say it's not all remote or all in person. Figure out what work that you do together best when you're in person, and then what doesn't require that. And then when do we add most value to our customers? In many cases, remote is actually great for adding value to customers because you can actually go and meet that client in person, right? You can go and have those discussions that you may not necessarily have if you're remote, and build those level of connections. There are certain times where you need to have that in-person meeting with a customer, whether it's doing your sales meeting, or maybe you're doing your annual or quarterly check-in with your client, or if you're trying to troubleshoot an issue. Now, depending on if it's software or if it's non-software related, you need to be in those discussions, maybe in person. If you're trying to really solve a problem together where there's no clear solution in sight, those require intense level of collaboration and brainstorming, where you need to probably meet together and have those discussions in person. But in some cases, you don't, right? If it's just a discussion that you can have which over a computer or a phone, in those cases you don't, right? So the intentionality of defining the type of work, the type of role, and the work between the teams and the clients require you to then define how do you structure the work so that you don't have to necessarily say it's all hybrid or all remote or all in co-located environment. So that requires you to ask some of these right questions. Okay, so the changes, what are we talking about when we understanding the changes for hybrid work, right? So there are some changes you have to make as an organization, as a manager in your role, so that you can really work in a hybrid environment better than you probably were, 4 or 5 years ago when you were probably all co-located. So the work management cannot be reactive anymore. It cannot be a tap on the shoulder where you think of something, you walk outside of your cubicle or your office and tap on somebody's shoulder and ask a quick question, then go somewhere else and ask another person a question and resolve it like that. It requires you to be a little bit more proactive. You cannot be reactive. You have to think about some of the challenges that might show up so that you can plan for that and then maybe collaborate together to solve for that. You obviously need to use a lot more tools. A lot of the tools out there, including the tools that we use engagedly, which really help you plan better, because now you have tools, your information about updates, your changes, your communication, your collaboration, all of those things can be used with those tools. Now, the communication in the in-person co-located environment, a lot of it was verbal. It's not necessarily always documented. You may agree to certain things and then you walk away and you come up with new ideas and you finish a project. Or you might draw something on a whiteboard and then everybody knows, understands it. It's very convenient. It works really well. You can do things very collaboratively in those environments. But when you go to a hybrid environment, it needs to be very much better articulated. You can't necessarily be collaborating, thinking of ideas and spending hours on a call trying to really make this work, because you can't see the full body language. You can't really be in person to see and draw things out on a whiteboard or a flip chart. So and it becomes a little bit more continuous rather than this event where you come together and you figure everything out on the whiteboard. So you use some tools that can help you do these things maybe asynchronously instead of synchronously like you used to do in an in-person environment. So how does employee development change? So employee development in the one in person, this is one of the things that I do feel in person does work very well compared to a hybrid or a remote environment, is you learn from osmosis a lot by being in the location, around your leaders, around other people who are doing certain things better than maybe you are. Or maybe you're a new hire, you're really trying to understand how things are getting done, because what they teach you in school is not always applicable at work, right? So you learn a lot by observing. There's not necessarily a formal online training or an in-person training that's given to you. And those are some of the things that happened all the time. Early in my career, I learned a lot from verbal cues I would get from my manager, verbal cues I would get some from the teams in meetings. I would see how they conduct themselves, and I learned a lot from those observations. And obviously, there used to be a lot more classroom training. I can't remember the last time I actually even heard about classroom training being done, at least in my organization and other organizations that I've been working with. It really moves down to more of an active mentoring and coaching type of environment in a remote and a hybrid environment, right? You really need to have some sort of a mentorship program set up where you are paired with a mentor who's more senior, maybe not necessarily somebody who you directly report to, or maybe getting a coach. And we are seeing a big increase in those type of programs within organizations where people are getting coaches, or there are different coaching companies providing different coaches, internal and external, or assigning mentors within organizations who can help them work through their growth, work through their getting used to the culture if you're a new hire, and really understanding how the organization works. And then a lot of the training has moved online. There's a lot of e-learning. AI is playing a big part in understanding what type of training might be helpful for your role, depending on your proficiency levels and type of work you do. And then the value that the training has for your role based on feedback from other people. So that has moved. So the intentionality of moving development from this osmosis-based approach to a more active approach, classroom-based training to more of an online-based training, those are some of the things that have to change in the employee development. So office space, this is a big one. If previously and even now, many of office space are designed for a place to go and work, with cubicles and office rooms and desk spaces and things like that. We really need to rethink our office space as a collaboration space. We really need to think about that, a space where people come together to collaborate, not to come together so they can go to their cubicle and work, because they can do that at home very well. What they really want to do at the office space is to really work together and collaborate. And I think that's the key here in this environment, is really transform and rethink your office space as a place where you come together to, fight out the ideas, come up with innovation, come up with ways your teams can cross collaborate better together, where you even bring your clients in to work together. So these are really no longer just spaces for you to work, but they're meeting spaces that spur these collaborations within your work environment. I mentioned collaboration already. I'll keep talking about that because organizations thrive best when they collaborate well together. So meeting and whiteboarding obviously has moved to collaboration, to more of a digital collaboration. And obviously in those cases where you need to be in person, that's when you really need to use these office spaces as your collaboration spaces. Okay, so recommending. What does recommending a good hybrid work culture? Here are some of the thoughts that I have and I've seen work. Now, I have been in hybrid remote environment for well over 20 years, so it's fairly natural for me. So I was just thinking about what are the things that help me and help my teams really work well together. One is really communicating purpose with clarity is extremely important. So you can't be vague because it can be misunderstood, and there's no way to correct that because you have no way of interacting with that person on a hourly, daily basis in person. So communication skills of a manager, communication skills of every employee, whether they're an individual contributor or a leader, becomes extremely important because you have to make sure you're clearly communicating because they can read your body language. They can read your intention by using those words that I'm using here, for example, right? So those things become very important, especially if they're across time zones where you may not be necessarily working in a synchronous manner. Um, the other thing I mentioned about this team that has 5 people, 3 people are working on site, 2 people are working remotely. How do you involve those remote people into your company rituals, right? If you are doing every Friday lunch outside, a long lunch, I used to have that one of my first jobs where we would find a new restaurant every Friday, and then we would go out and have a nice long lunch. Now, obviously, those were some of the good days, but how do you make sure the remote people are missing out on such rituals that you might do? I don't necessarily have an answer. It really depends on your culture, but make sure you're thinking about that so that you're not, ignoring those people and getting them out of the culture. Because what will happen is you'll lose some of the best people in your future leadership roles, right? If you're looking to promote somebody, there will be a proximity bias that you'll have with people you're closely working with. And if you're not the manager, if you're the leader, you really want to make sure that your managers are not using proximity bias in who they recommend when there's a new open role, or if you're having some sort of cutbacks in your organization, proximity bias can also impact that. You may be losing some of your best people in those cutbacks and keeping the people just because they're closer to the manager and they're in person. So weaving your organizational values in your communication one-on-one also become very important, right? Your communications, again, become important because your organizational values are not something that's on a whiteboard anymore or a poster on a wall because they can't see it. It doesn't exist in a remote environment. So you need to really think about how, in your communication, how are you weaving in those values in your one-on-ones as a manager? And how are you training your managers to make sure they're including that in their discussions with their people? And then creating an org structure that reflects remote hybrid work so the work gets done effectively. And I talked about that. How do you create a work structure where you are not ignoring your remote people? You're bringing them together, maybe having those team meetings and and the collaboration and your one-on-ones and all of those things that go together in an organization that works together, that has a structure that reflects this really, really well. So next bullet is the most important one. You're only as good as your managers in your organization. I always emphasize and I overemphasize that the managers are your point of failure or your point of success in your organization. So the best organizations have one of the best managers. And improving your manager's skills in a hybrid work environment for working effectively in a hybrid work environment becomes extremely important. So make sure you're investing in that. And that doesn't necessarily mean sending them for online training. It's things like these that I'm talking about in this webinar, for example. How are you making sure that they are having those effective one-on-ones? How are you making sure that the managers are not ignoring their remote employees at the expense of having a proximity bias to the people they're working closely with in person? And then do invest in tools and software. Now, without being a little shameless here, tools like Engagely really help, right? There are other tools out there for project management. There are tools out there for like Slack and Teams that really help you work together in a more synchronous fashion where communication is a lot more streamlined. There's more transparency in the work. You can use OKRs using a tool, or you can use different project management tools that are more real time, that are all on the web or on an app to help really align your teams. The last bullet, I think, is regardless of whether you are hybrid or not, is to have a really good performance and recognition culture, because people want to feel appreciated. They feel like they matter, and it becomes even more important when they're remote because they don't necessarily get to see you on a daily basis sometimes, and they need to know that they're valued and they're not getting disconnected and ignored. So those are some of the things, recommendations that I have from designing a hybrid work culture. By no means is this an exhaustive list, but these are some things to think about as you're thinking about designing a work culture that really works well when people are not all in one location.
Shri, oh,
Okay, so I think that's basically all I have. I'm just gonna go um, and summarize here. Lori, did you have a question?
no, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm just going to repeat what I just said. Communicating with clarity. I think I already went through this. Okay, so last word. So I just want to emphasize, it's not, hybrid work is not a schedule or an employment benefit. It is the future of work, and it is here now. So we can't necessarily say, oh, we do hybrid work, and it is a buzzword. It is work now. Hybrid work is work now for most organizations. Obviously, certain organizations, if you're a construction company, you can't build build a house remotely. So there are things like that do require people to be in person. But for a lot of organizations, especially in the services sector or professional services sector, hybrid work is the norm. So unless you are transforming your organizational practices and development to support that work culture, you're not going to be optimizing your workforce.
Thank you, Shri. That was so well done. I love how you deconstructed it and made it sound so practical, so doable. And really the focus on intentionality. I can tell you've been doing this for a long time. We do have a question, and that is, it's from Beth, and she says, I agree that managers are key to success, but it's not often the priority of company leadership. How do you convince them this is worth their time and money?
Oh my God, that's a tough one. I mean, if the leaders are not convinced, then I guess the question is, do we need good leaders? The answer is obvious, yes. And how do you get good leaders? They have to be good managers first. So if you are not a good manager first, you can't be a good leader. And this is another debate I have a lot of times with many people online and stuff, where leadership is not about just inspiring people. It's also about creating good processes. So you can't just say, I have this vision and then walk away. How do you have systems and processes in place that includes measurement systems, that include employee development systems, that include career growth systems of optimizing your work and cross team functional collaboration work. Unless you have all of those pieces in place, all your vision and inspiration will be a lot of kumbaya, and nothing will show up for that. And that requires good managers to execute on that. So you can have KPIs. If you have really good KPIs, you can do engagement surveys to know which managers are doing well, which managers are not. You can get polls. You can also see, are employees being better retained? Is the productivity higher for certain managers? There are certain KPIs you can use to really identify, which manager is doing well, who's not.
That's great. Managers are key, and it's really more than just leadership. I love that. One other question, I think we do have a minute. Can you expand on how development is AI driven? And that maybe relates to your platform.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just my platform. There are several platforms out there. I think when I say AI driven, I know AI is the buzzword these days. What it does help using AI is it can identify what's using the knowledge that's already out there. It can recommend training for you as the field is evolving, because we are not always aware of the training our employee needs to do their job, because things are changing so fast. And let's just look at an example. Online marketing, because one thing I'm close to is digital marketing. SEO has been disrupted badly in the last few months because of Bard AI from Google and ChatGPT and other things. And it's really changing. So if you go and do Google search on keywords, you will see a lot of Q&A type of responses before you actually see the company names that you want to look for. So things have changed. And if you're not keeping up with that, and now you don't know what type of training to take to be a good digital marketer, right? And an AI can recommend based on the changes that are happening, because other people are probably taking similar courses in your field. it can recommend, hey, maybe you need to take these courses because this course is really popular in your network or among the people in your role.
Thank you, Sri. Thank you so much for such an amazing presentation. Really appreciate your thoughts and your perspective and your experience.
Absolutely. Thank you.